Today, Open Source Security is talking to Philippe Ombredanne, the lead maintainer of About Code and Scan Code, the co-founder of SPDX, the creator of Package URL, and currently involved with CycloneDX. Holy cow, Philippe, that is a mouthful. Welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome, Josh. Thank you for having me in.
So even though you have this amazing collection of accomplishments behind you, I actually asked you to come to talk about PURL, which is package URLs today. And we'll have you back for all that other stuff. But I love PURLs, and I'm very excited to have you here. So this is like very much one of those fanboying out moments. But let's start with, for anyone who doesn't know, what is a package URL?
So it's a small string to identify a package between tools in the software supply chain in SBOMs, and it came about. Was it when? Back in 2017, so it's most like 8-9 years ago. Yeah. We had these tools which were pretty decent at finding the origin of code, the license, and everybody's saying, when do you do security? I said, well, security. Okay, so one day we started to look at security, and it was extremely hard to get from the package we found by looking at package manifest, log files, and the likes, and looking up in the National Voting the NVD National Voting Database, or there used to be a thing also we had looked a bit before. It was called the OSVDB. Which
I remember that.
Was called open sourced vulnerability database. So I was fooled into believing it was open source. It wasn't. But so it was extremely hard to go from I found an NPM, or I found a PyPI package or a Maven jar, and is there non-security issues? And it was pure manual work, looking for CPs, doing research, and trying to do guesswork. And so we said, well, let's try to have something. And since there's no database that fits our needs, let's create one, because we need more vulnerability database, right? The more the merrier. So that's how it started. And at the time, there was a project, I don't know if it's still active, called Grapheas, made by folks from Google. It was about an attestation in the supply chain of sorts, an early project. I don't know where it finished. I don't know if you have an insight there.
I know of Grapheas. I don't know if it's still alive. I mean, I guess we can look it up.
Anyway, they were working with folks from JFrog, the folks doing Artifactory and X-Ray. And they had this wonderful way to reference URLs for packages. So they were literally using something like, Maven, colon, and then they were making up URLs for each of the package. I thought this is awesome. I don't know why they didn't really catch on and participated more in the event, but basically I took that and we started crafting a small URL to use as a key to a package in the vulnerability database and as the key of the package we're scanning. So you would have a better way to go from one to the other. So that's the whole story there. And I don't know why I started doing that, but I asked a lot of folks for input and feedback. Especially, I wanted to call that a URL, but there were a lot of pedantic people about, no, it's not a URL, it's a URN or it's a URI. And I said, the heck with that. We're going to call the URL gods, which are, I forgot the name. I think there's a guy called Thomas van de Ven, I forgot. These guys are behind a lot of W3C standards. So I'm
sure.
I should not forget their name. But anyway, I reached out to them to say, hey, come in, tell us if what we're doing is completely brain dead, brain damage, or whether it makes some sense. That, oh, it's a URL, you're cool, go for it. There was a lot of people also complaining about the fact that, well, PURL, it's already taken, and there's a permanent URL. But even to these days, there were folks recently that says, well, PURL is a URI. You should rename it to PURI.
I have no doubt. Like, there's nothing more hilarious than the URL, URI, URN people arguing about what something is. And no one cares except them.
No, but it's funny. In a way, I don't think they even really care. It's more like a knee-jerk reaction.
That could be.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did not know that was the inception of Perl. I was going to ask you about that. So that's pretty cool. And I just looked it up. It looks like Grapheus does still exist. It had a commit last week. So
Oh, great.
still around. Yeah. But okay, so I want to ask one question before we kind of move on. You mentioned CPEs, which is Common Platform Enumeration.
Yes.
CPEs are what NVD uses in their data. And anyone who's ever worked with CPEs hates them more than anything else they've ever used. But I want you to give us the like very short explanation of like, why is PURL superior to CPE? Because I think for anyone not necessarily like in the weeds of this stuff, it's probably not super obvious why like CPE isn't good enough for everyone.
Yeah. So funny enough, a couple of years ago, there's folks from CISA that reached out to discuss about PURL for SBOM and all that kind of stuff. And there were, I think, the creators of CPE that were there.
Nice.
It was a private discussion. And these guys were apologizing about CPE, which I thought, so you see, even them were not happy about them. And I say, awesome. You should not, because you created something where no one was doing anything.
Yeah,
and right. I think CPEs, so a bit of information about CPE. CPE is like a given name, right?
Yes.
You're called Josh Brusher. If I look at you, I have no idea that your name is Josh Brusher. Though, now if I tell, well, white male with glasses, brown hair, forgot to shave this morning.
I didn't forget.
250 pounds, 5 foot. Then I've described you very, very precisely. Yep. So no, but that would be the idea of a PURL. No, it's based on the content as opposed to be based on some given name, which is arbitrary. But it's based on the content in a way that's kind of coarse-grained enough, so it's easy. Now, let's take an example of a funny historical CPE. So CPE was designed for a time when the software that was problematic was, Adobe Acrobat, Microsoft Windows, and Office.
Yes.
In these old days, every piece of software had a vendor, right? Because really, you would need to purchase the software to be something to be serious. So there's the vendor that's a mandatory thing when you create a CPE. You're hard pressed to figure out who is the vendor of an open source project, when the vast majority of the software you consume today are open source packages. And as an example, these have been assigned in a completely random fashion historically. They used to be zlib or zlib or zlib, depending on which side of the world you are, which was assigned a vendor called GNU, which was like, why? Why is that? So no, it's been changed since, because of course the vendors can change, which adds a bit of spice into the equation. But the fact that you must have something which is completely made up, arbitrary, made CPE something difficult. There's another small problem with CPE is that they're assigned by the NVD if and only if you have a security issue.
Yep.
So if you don't have a security bug, then tough luck. And because they're made up name, some people call you Josh, some other people may call you Joshua, and you end up having multiple times the same CPE.
Only when I'm in trouble, Philippe. Well, I have my other example I like to use. So with CPEs, you've got vendor, right? And then you have the product. And what happens when you have, like in the case of Google has a library called Protocol Buffers, Protobuf, and they have Protobuf for Java and Python and NPM and everything. So like the vendor and the product name are the same, but you could be talking about very, very different things. And it's an enormous headache of mine.
Yeah. So CPE invented stars for that purpose. So you have a lot of different positions where you can put stars, and if you see a string and you see many stars in this, stars and columns, you can know it's a CPE. You don't need to do any kind of parsing or AI. It's a CPE. So because it's a given name, you cannot just go look in your code and figure out that the vendor for zlib in this database is GNU.
That's right.
The vendor could be either Jean-Loup Galli or Mark Adler. Actually, the one that maintains it actively today is Mark Adler. If anything, that would be the person you could refer to. And if you think about GitHub as a place which is quasi-package-like, you have version control issues, you can download things, you can reference software with tags and commits. That would be the most natural way to refer today to zlib, either versions available for download from zlib.net or the Git repo from the upstream maintainer, which is, in this case, Mark Adler. GNU never was involved as the GNU project never was involved with zlib in any way, shape, or form that I know of.
Well, okay, that is a historical artifact, right? From back when, I mean, there's still people who think the Linux Foundation writes all open source. I mean, we won't get into that. But let's talk about Perl now, okay? So there's all these weird problems, right? CPE has obvious things it cannot do, but you created package URLs, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, is today, if you need to do package identification, PURLs are literally the best thing that exists, like by a wide margin. Now, I'll add...
Amen to that.
That isn't because Perl is perfect. It's because everything else is so bad. Right? Like,
Agreed. So it's really winning by attrition, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's another set of contenders in the space, which is to use checksums as an identifier for packages. So you have two things which are very similar. One is called Omnibor. One is called Software Heritage ID. Software Heritage ID is essentially a Git blob SHA-1 on the tree. So is Omnibor. So it's taking the concept of being able to checksum a whole tree. And it's awesome because it's very accurate, right? You don't know where you'll find that, but it's very precise and accurate. SHA-256 for container image. Awesome, also very precise. You know exactly which container image is it, except you may not be able to figure out where can I find this puppy.
Yes, that's
right. And what I like to think of is you need both eventually. You need to have checksums for strong validations. And you need Perl to be able to find where things are and give it a human face. It's a bit like you need a home address. That would be a Perl. You need also GPS coordinates. That's fine. But you have an infinite number of GPS coordinates in your home, in your backyard, the front yard, and else. Omnibor, Software Heritage ID, this kind of checksum-based identifiers are GPS coordinates down to the nanoseconds.
Yeah.
And you know, when I'm coming for a drink at your place, I don't need that level of precision.
Yes, correct. Well, and from my perspective, the challenge has always been, if I have a thing that isn't exactly correct, maybe there have been some changes made by a distributor or something like that, and maybe it's in a container image, whatever, it is convenient to be able to suss out, be like, I think this is this package. And that's where doing something like Perl can, like you said, get you into like a GitHub repo, and then you can start looking at checksums and things like that. But if all I have is a checksum and it doesn't match anything, I literally have nothing, right? I'm done.
Yeah. There's not much you can do with that. Though you could eventually, looking at, for instance, Software Heritage, which is this project where they archive billions and tens of billions and petabytes of source code, you could look up, based on the checksum, if this file ever existed. But it's if this file ever existed, if you have a 1-bit difference between your file and a file that did exist sometime, someplace, you won't find it.
And exactly.
We have a small project on the side to actually also detect code based on content, doing code matching, especially one that we just completed, which is a bit of an oddity, which is to detect if code may have been AI generated.
Ah, sure.
It's actually not really detecting really if code has been AI generated, but if code may be strikingly similar to existing open source code, which is a good enough proxy with a few extra twists where if you generate code, depending on the temperature of the model, you may generate exactly the same control flow, but I don't know why, but the variables will all be different, variable names. So there's a small twist to abstract the name of the variables and get something which is a bit more fuzzy, so you can match more accurately the things. It's not based on control flows. It's really based on syntactic similarities, which is what matters from a copyright point of view anyway.
Right. Is that an open source project or is that
everything I do is open source.
Oh, it is? Nice.
There's one exception. I don't share my private keys most of the time.
That seems fair. Okay, you'll have to. What is the name of this project?
It's part of About Code. I'll
just send me a link. I'll put it in the show notes. That sounds really freaking cool.
If you search AI generated code search, maybe is it popular enough? No, probably not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yes, actually, it comes.
Oh, good.
It comes in maybe we all live in a small search bubble, so who knows? I'll share the link with you.
Yeah.
Via Signal, and there you go. Yeah, it's open source. It's not. It's usable. It works. There's a lot of work to be done to scale it and get better results. But it's actually surprisingly efficient. We did a small test where we indexed the top 50,000 NPM source code. And then we asked ChatGPT, hey, actually, it's funny. We're getting back to PURL. We of course we used PURL for that, and we asked ChatGPT, generate classic JS code for this package URL, and then the PURL. Do not put any comments, any commentaries, just put the code. And we got about 30 cases out of 100 where we had strikingly similar segments of code. Now, in earnest, there's a few false positives, so it's more closer to 20. It's absolutely non-scientific, but it's something that I know is on the radar of legal team in large companies. It's a concern for them because what it shows, and there's serious academic studies on that, what it shows is that LLMs memorize the training data.
Right.
And eventually, when prompted in a certain way, they'll spit it out.
Exactly.
Now, nobody cares anymore about the origin of code and the source code license anyway, because everything is going to be vibed pretty soon.
Well, that's easy to say until there's a court case that says you have to care now, and then everyone will care a lot.
Yeah. It's funny. I was that was in April at an event in Germany organized by the Free Software Foundation Europe called the Legal and Licensing Workshop. And it's basically an event where you have open source savvy lawyers from the world over coming and gathering once a year. It's under Chatham House rule, so you cannot repeat who said what. But there were funny stuff there. Is the American and the European have a very different view of the impact of copyrights on large language models. completely different view for now. But the other thing that was funny is that these are open source licensing savvy lawyers, and they were talking about two things. One, AI and Gen AI, to no end. And second, security, which is interesting because they really see with the emergence of and the importance of compliance, this as something which is on their radar as a risk that they need to manage for their corporations and companies.
Sure. Yeah. All right. We're in the weeds. I'm going to pull this out. I want to talk about PURL. PURL. Okay, this is really good. Like this we'll have to talk about this someday in the future because this is
definitely
extremely interesting.
But I can meander and visit rabbit holes to no end.
I love it though. That's so much fun. That's the best part of shows like this. Like I love that. Okay, so I want to talk about PURL. You have a PURL spec that is in GitHub. I'll put a link to it. And let's just kind of break down what you have. So does every PURL URL, does every PURL start with PKG or are there more than one beginning types?
So it always starts with PKG and then a colon.
Okay.
And there was a reason for that because initially you had a Maven PURL which started with Maven, an NPM PURL which started with NPM. And the URL gods told me, you're going to have a bit of a problem to register all of these at YANA. So if you can have a single prefix for all these URLs so that becomes your scheme, you'll thank me in the future. And so that's how we get that. And then after that, you have what we call a package type.
Yep.
Very simply, NPM, Maven, and the likes.
And you have a list of all the types.
Yes.
It's
fairly easy to add new types. Submit a pull request, and then we argue on the details for no end. And eventually it lands in the repository. But the process is simple. It's painful sometimes because you have a lot of arguing, but that's what you have there.
Now, I do have a question about that. So all of your types appear to be open source repositories.
Yes.
Do you have the ability to catalog like non-open source software with a PURL?
So yes and no. Yes, in the sense that you're welcome to create your own type. No, because there's no explicit provision in the spec. And yes, because there's a lot of work that's being done. Someone called Tom Harwich is working on something. Ole Johansson is working on something also. So eventually, yes. I know, for instance, the folks from Oracle recently on one of these working groups said they're considering using package URL for all of their proprietary products as a way to unify how you reference product. There's a very large blue hardware and software company that also is looking at something similar from what I heard.
No one will crack that code.
Yeah, and in the end, it kind of makes sense to have a simple command identifier. You want to be careful not to overdo it. For instance, it's a URL, so you can have a query string and you can put, key value pairs on the right. We call them qualifiers. And if you've seen some of these long URLs you have on, say, images encoded on web page as base64, you can have like thousands of bytes in these. I don't think that's where we want to go with PURL. But supporting proprietary, yes, why not? The difficulty there is the value of PURL, and why I think it makes sense and clicks with so many people is that you look at the package you use, the code you use, and you say, oh, it's an NPM called foo version 123. There you go. That's your PURL. PKG npm /foo at 123. So you have zero impedance mismatch, zero brain surgery to do to go from what you see in the PURL. If I have a piece of code that's proprietary, how do I determine what's its name and version and where it's coming from?
Sure.
So as long as vendors, because here we're really talking about vendors again, can come and provide this kind of invisible hand which ensure that names are unique, that versions make some sense. I think this can work. There's also potentially ways to very simply specify where do you put a PURL in a product. There's a convention on Linux distro to put a CPE on some distros. Red Hat does that. On etc, I think it's OS release or some file in the etc directory.
Yeah.
Which it's coarse-grained CPE. It's for the whole distro. It's not like for a single package. You could imagine a way to bake the PURL of a proprietary package, a proprietary product inside an ELF or inside a jar to help discover what these proprietary products are. Now, the prize in all cases, why do we care about all that? I think we want to be able to effortlessly find the code that we use in a product system application and look up in the vulnerability database, figure out, is this vulnerable? That's the prize. Later on, we can say, is this still maintained? Is still alive? Is it decent quality code? You can do all kind of stuff, but just figuring out for now, do we have another Log4j on our hand? By the way, segue, let's do a small segue in Log4j because that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, good.
I'm working with the maintainers of Log4j these days. We have a small project to do beach cleaning. And beach cleaning to remove the Log4j trash on the beach.
Nice.
By some measures, there's several thousands jars on Maven Central that embed vulnerable versions of Log4j.
Yes.
Which are versions from 4 years ago. And they're gleefully ignored by all the scanners. Because there's a process called shading, where the Java bytecode may be relocated, rewritten. So it's no longer org Apache Log4j with a nice checksum or something. It's, com foobar / logging / Log4j. And so we're trying to figure out, we built some tools in ScanCode to help detect that, but we want to run that at a certain scale and then work with each of the maintainers, to do a responsible disclosure process, which takes a shitload of time.
Oh, yeah.
And ensuring that they can fix their act, that eventually we can get a CVE for them, or we attach them to the original Log4j CVE. And you'd say, why do you care? 3,000 of these 4 years later. I have a buddy that works in a very large big tech company that I will not name, which does some hosting. They're called cloud hosting, but that leaves a few open.
Sure.
He was called on deck on mid-December 2021 saying, hey, you tag your rate, you're gonna resolve this Log4j problem for all of our customers. He had a way within 48 hours to eventually patch all their customers' installations. And the powers that be decide, no way in hell we patch our customers' code. Because if we start fixing the security bugs, why not fix all the bugs, right? And what's the liability? And the funny stuff is, fast forward today, they still have between 20 and 30% of their customers that run Java apps that run vulnerable versions of Log4j from 4 years ago.
Yep.
Even though they were called and says, hey, it is how you can patch the stuff. People don't care. So that explains why it's important to make this a bit more visible. I don't know how they cope with that. I'm assuming they probably put some kind of perimeter security to avoid folks from outside of their cloud can go inside and exploit the issues. I have no idea, but it's amazing how something as damageable and easy to exploit can still be lingering on today. So not even hidden like the one we're discussing with the Log4j folks, but just in plain sight. You know, you scan it and you find a version 1.2.13 or 14 from 4 years ago, which is like not even a script kiddie, a baby could hack that.
Yes. I mean, I've seen many things around this, and there's sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. My suspicion is the vast majority just don't even know that they have this stuff. You know what I mean? And even if they're told, a lot of them are probably too busy to care. I mean, that's one of the challenges in this whole space, right? Is awareness to begin with, just like knowing what you have, which is always funny because I know you and I are kind of in the same boat where like all these government regulations are starting to say you need SBOMs. And then these people come out of the woodwork that are like, oh, SBOMs are stupid and they don't do anything. It's like, this is like the absolute bottom of the ladder here we're talking about. Like, I think it's okay if we know what we got, you know?
And by the way, it's not only it's the absolute bottom of the ladder, but it's going to be a serious problem. I was about to use bird words. Here's something that I've seen in at least 2 occasions, one live and one reported to me. You have a vendor that's doing the right thing and shares an SBOM with their customer. Customer received the SBOM and the software says, oh, I don't trust this stuff and we have these brand new scanners. Let me scan their stuff anyway. Customer finds different set of package and package versions. Then goes back to vendor saying, hey, you know, your SBOM is lying and blah, blah, blah. At the scale, say a very large software company, you have the customer that calls his sales rep, that calls the technical person, that comes back, that says, okay, let's talk to legal. Legal says, no, you need to talk to this one. By the time you finish, you've wasted 500 or 50 grand just of churn, trying to figure out how do I solve that shit. And I don't know how to resolve this. But since we have so many tools that provide inaccurate, I'm not talking SBOM here, inaccurate set of package that may exist in a product. And they're not very good. And even mine are not very good. All the tools are not very good.
Yeah.
It's hard. And then you have this kind of discussions on your SBOM is not right, your SBOM is right. It's as we're going to see the Cyber Resilience Act kick into effect in Europe and essentially kick into effect into the world, by virtue of, if you want to do any kind of business in Europe, you have to have that. And you have to have an SBOM. That's going to be a pardon my French, a shit show.
It will be. Yes. At the beginning, look, this is where things like PURLs are going to make a difference, right? Because once we have like widespread use of PURLs, it becomes easier to be like, this thing is this thing. And I know we've got to kind of get, land this airplane and get going, but here's kind of my point. As a tool vendor, speaking to another tool vendor, if you have tools and they screw this up, that's a bug in your tool vendor. Like, go yell at your tool vendor. Don't yell at your vendor. Don't yell at your customer, right? Yeah. I think that's going to be, because today I see a lot of customers going to their vendors and saying, oh, the tool says this, instead of going to the tool vendor and saying, your tool's broken, fix this bug.
Yeah. So it's a serious issue. I've thought about a couple ways around or to ease the pain. Maybe is to put together benchmarks or ground truth where we select real case, real world, open source or proprietary app, something that's actually in all case we can download from the internet and use as a base. We all agree and scan it to death. So we really know the ground truth. And then that becomes the benchmark for others to say, well, if your tool is not able to report the results, that's your fault. You have to go back to your tool. Because that's a real issue. We did a small study last year and comparing the results of commercial scanners on a bunch of container images. we thought with a lot of hubris it would be super easy, you know. Let's
Nope.
get them, ask them all cyclone DX SBOM. We'll div the SBOM conceptually and we'll be done in a week. It was total madness. The things were all over the map. I mean, one of the tool to give you the problems on a universal base image from Red Hat, which is of course full of RPMs,
right.
reported a Debian package. Now, technically,
Awesome.
you and I are probably able to put a kind of Frankenstein container image that has a bunch of RPM and a bunch of Debian package. Yes, you can stuff them. There's no question about that, except that nobody does that. And Red Hat doesn't do that for sure. Now, the real pernicious and dangerous thing in this case is, imagine that the Debian package was not entirely wrong. There was effectively a package like that, different version, different patch level, but from the same open source package in the image. It was an RPM, it was not Debian. Now, imagine that there is a vulnerability on this Debian package. Now, your security team says, okay, we need to patch this. We have this Debian package in this image. How do I update my Debian package in my RPM image?
Yup.
Good luck with that, right?
Yup.
Or even worse is that there's a vulnerability in the underlying RPM package. And now it's not present in the Debian package, which has a different patch level. Yep. Life is ignorance is bliss then, right? You don't care about the stuff. That's the kind of problems you're facing there. So I probably some kind of open benchmark where everyone can participate, so it's not biased, would be a way out. And by the way, you were talking about, you saying tool vendor to tool vendor. We're actually moving to a non-profit model and building a non-profit foundation. It's going to be called the About Code Foundation. So I can do a small shameless plug. And the goal is really to help support PURL, data kit by PURL, with BDA package and vulnerabilities, and the tools that go around that, really as reference for the ecosystem at large, as a non-profit public benefit endeavor.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, holy cow. I know we've run ourselves out of time today, but you definitely need to come back and talk about your foundation, because that sounds fascinating. And it delights me that PURL is going to have like a foundation home, because I know that's one of the complaints people have always had is like, who's this Philippe guy? Like, how do we know this is a project we can trust? So,
you can. You know, my rule about governance is that it's great to bring in governance when it really hurts.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Before that, it's too early, and you end up with the risk of over-engineering governance.
Exactly. Yes. Right. 100%. All right, Philippe, I know we got to go, but holy cow, this has been an amazing discussion. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh, and sorry for visiting all these rabbit
No way.
holes. But they were fun.
That. I love it.
Lots,
right. And
lots of interesting tunnels to visit.
it's so good, Philippe. Thank you. All right, and I've got one last note for all the folks out there that made it to the end. Is I'm out for a couple of weeks on holiday, and I decided like I'm not going to try to book a bunch of stuff. Like I'm just out. So I'll see you when I see you. So all right, everyone.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. All right, thank you much.